The error of the confusion of cause and effect. There is no more dangerous error than to confound the effect with the cause. I call this error the intrinsic perversion of reason. Nevertheless, this error is one of the most ancient and most recent habits of mankind. In one part of the world, it has even been canonized. It bears the name of, quote, religion, unquote, and, quote, morality, unquote. Every postulate formulated by religion and morality contains it. Priests and the promulgators of moral laws are the promoters of this perversion of reason. Let me give you an example. Everybody knows the book of the famous Cornaro, in which he recommends his slender diet as the recipe for a long, happy, and also virtuous life. Few books have been so widely read, and to this day many thousand copies of it are still printed annually in England. I do not doubt that there is scarcely a single book, the Bible of course excepted, that has worked more mischief, shortened more lives than this well-meant curiosity. The reason of this is the confusion of effect and cause. This worthy Italian saw the cause of his long life in his diet, whereas the prerequisites of long life, which are exceptional slowness of molecular change and a low rate of expenditure in energy, were the cause of his meager diet. He was not at liberty to eat a small or a great amount. His frugality was not the result of free choice. He would have been ill had he eaten more. He who does not happen to be a carp, however, is not only wise to eat well, but is also compelled to do so. A scholar of the present day, with his rapid consumption of nervous energy, would soon go to the dogs on Cornaro's diet. Crede experto. 2. The most general principle lying at the root of every religion and morality is this, quote, do this and that, and avoid this and that, and thou wilt be happy. Otherwise, unquote. Every morality and every religion is this imperative. I call it the great original sin of reason, immortal unreason. In my mouth, this principle is converted into its opposite. First example of my transvaluation of all values. A well-constituted man, a man who is one of nature's lucky strokes, must perform certain actions, and instinctively fear other actions. He introduces the element of order, of which he is the physiological manifestation, into his relations with men and things. In a formula, his virtue is the consequence of his good constitution. Longevity and plentiful offspring are not the reward of virtue. Virtue itself is, on the contrary, that retardation of the metabolic process which, among other things, results in a long life and in plentiful offspring, in short, in Cornarism. The Church and morality say, quote, a race, a people perish through vice and luxury, unquote. My reinstantiated reason says, when a people are going to the dogs, when they are degenerating physiologically, vice and luxury, that is to say, the need of ever stronger and more frequent stimuli such as all exhausted natures are acquainted with, are bound to result. Such and such a young man grows pale and withered prematurely. His friends say this or that illness is the cause of it. I say, the fact that he became ill, the fact that he did not resist illness, was in itself already the outcome of impoverished life, of hereditary exhaustion. The newspaper reader says, such and such a party, by committing such an error, will meet its death. My superior politics say, a party that can make such mistakes is in its last agony. It no longer possesses any certainty of instinct. Every mistake is, in every sense, the sequel to degeneration of the instincts, to disintegration of the will. This is almost the definition of evil. Everything valuable is instinct, and consequently easy, necessary, free. Exertion is an objection. The god is characteristically different from the hero. In my language, light feet are the first attribute of divinity. 3. The error of false causality. In all ages, men have believed that they knew what a cause was. But whence did we derive this knowledge? Or, more accurately, this faith in the fact that we know? Out of the realm of the famous inner facts of consciousness, not one of which has yet proved itself to be a fact. We believed ourselves to be causes, even in the action of the will. We thought that in this matter, at least we caught causality red-handed. No one doubted that all the antecedentia of an action were to be sought in consciousness, and could be discovered there as motive, if only they were sought. Otherwise we should not be free to perform them. We should not have been responsible for them. Finally, who would have questioned that a thought is caused, that the ego causes the thought? Of these three facts of inner consciousness, by means of which causality seemed to be guaranteed, the first and most convincing is that of the will as cause. The conception of consciousness, spirit, as a cause, and subsequently that of the ego, the subject, as a cause, were merely born afterwards, once the causality of the will stood established as given, as a fact of experience. Meanwhile, we have come to our senses. Today we no longer believe a word of all this. The, quote, inner world, unquote, is full of phantoms and will-o'-the-wisps. The will is one of these. The will no longer actuates. Consequently, it no longer explains anything. All it does is to accompany processes. It may even be absent. The so-called, quote, motive, unquote, is another error. It is merely a ripple on the surface of consciousness, a side issue of the action, which is much more likely to conceal than to reveal the antecedentia of the latter. And as for the ego, it has become legendary, fictional, a play upon words. It has ceased utterly and completely from thinking, feeling, and willing. What is the result of it all? There are no such things as spiritual causes. The whole of popular experience on this subject went to the devil. That is the result of it all. For we had blissfully abused that experience. We had built the world upon it as a world of causes, as a world of will, as a world of spirit. The most antiquated and most traditional psychology has been at work here. It has done nothing else. All phenomena were deeds in the light of this psychology, and all deeds were the result of will. According to it, the world was a complex mechanism of agents. An agent, a, quote, subject, unquote, lay at the root of all things. Man projected his three, quote, inner facts of consciousness, unquote, the will, the spirit, and the ego, in which he believed most firmly, outside himself. He first deduced the concept being out of the concept ego. He supposed, quote, things, unquote, to exist, as he did himself, according to his notion of the ego as cause. Was it to be wondered at that later on he always found in things only that which he had laid in them. The thing itself, I repeat, the concept thing, was merely a reflex of the belief in the ego as cause. And even your atom, my dear good mechanists and physicists, what an amount of error, of rudimentary psychology still adheres to it, not to speak of the thing in itself, of the horrendum pudendum of the metaphysicians. The error of spirit, regarded as a cause, confounded with reality, and made the measure of reality, and called God. 4. The error of imaginary causes. Starting out from dreamland, we find that to any definite sensation, like that produced by a distant cannon shot, for instance, we are wont to ascribe a cause after the fact. Very often quite a little romance in which the dreamer himself is, of course, the hero. Meanwhile, the sensation becomes protracted, like a sort of continuous echo, until, as it were, the instinct of causality allows it to come to the front rank, no longer, however, as a chance occurrence, but as a thing which has some meaning. The cannon shot presents itself in a causal manner, by means of an apparent reversal in the order of time. That which occurs last, the motivation, is experienced first, often with 100 details which flash past like lightning, and the shot is the result. What has happened? The ideas suggested by a particular state of our senses are misinterpreted as the cause of that state. As a matter of fact, we proceed in precisely the same manner when we are awake. The greater number of our general sensations, every kind of obstacle, pressure, tension, explosion in the interplay of the organs, and more particularly in the condition of the nervus sympathicus, stimulate our instinct of causality. We will have a reason which will account for our feeling thus or thus, for feeling ill or well. We are never satisfied by merely ascertaining the fact that we feel thus or thus. We admit this fact, we become conscious of it, only when we have attributed it to some kind of motivation. Memory, which in such circumstances unconsciously becomes active, adduces former conditions of a like kind, together with the causal interpretations with which they are associated, but not their real cause. The belief that the ideas, the accompanying processes of consciousness, have been the causes, is certainly produced by the agency of memory. And in this way, we become accustomed to a particular interpretation of causes which, truth to tell, actually hinders and even utterly prevents the investigation of the proper cause. 5. The psychological explanation of the above fact. To trace something unfamiliar back to something familiar is at once a relief, a comfort, and a satisfaction, while it also produces a feeling of power. The unfamiliar involves danger, anxiety, and care. The fundamental instinct is to get rid of these painful circumstances. First principle: any explanation is better than none at all. Since, at bottom, it is only a question of shaking oneself free from certain oppressive ideas, the means employed to this end are not selected with overmuch punctiliousness. The first idea, by means of which the unfamiliar is revealed as familiar, produces a feeling of such comfort that it is held to be true. The proof of happiness, of power, as the criterion of truth. The instinct of causality is therefore conditioned and stimulated by the feeling of fear. Whenever possible, the question, why, should not only educe the cause as cause, but rather a certain kind of cause, a comforting, liberating, and reassuring cause. The first result of this need is that something known or already experienced and recorded in the memory is posited as the cause. The new factor, that which has not been experienced and which is unfamiliar, is excluded from the sphere of causes. Not only do we try to find a certain kind of explanation as the cause, but those kinds of explanations are selected and preferred which dissipate most rapidly the sensation of strangeness, novelty, and unfamiliarity. In fact, the most ordinary explanations. And the result is that a certain manner of postulating causes tends to predominate ever more and more, becomes concentrated into a system, and finally reigns supreme, to the complete exclusion of all other causes and explanations. The banker thinks immediately of business, the Christian of sin, and the girl of her love affair. 6. The whole domain of morality and religion may be classified under the rubric imaginary causes. The explanation, of general unpleasant sensations. These sensations are dependent upon certain creatures who are hostile to us. Evil spirits, the most famous example of this, the mistaking of hysterical women for witches. These sensations are dependent upon actions which are reprehensible. The feeling of sin, sinfulness, is a manner of accounting for a certain physiological disorder. People always find reasons for being dissatisfied with themselves. These sensations depend upon punishment, upon compensation for something which we ought not to have done, which we ought not to have been. This idea was generalized in a more impudent form by Schopenhauer into that principle in which morality appears in its real colors, that is to say, as a veritable poisoner and slanderer of life. Quote, all great suffering, whether mental or physical, reveals what we deserve, for it could not visit us if we did not deserve it. Unquote. The World as Will and Idea, Volume 2, page 666. These sensations are the outcome of ill-considered actions, having evil consequences. The passions, the senses, postulated as causes, as guilty, by means of other calamities, distressing physiological conditions, are interpreted as, merited, unquote. The, explanation, unquote, of pleasant sensations. These sensations are dependent upon a trust in God. They may depend upon our consciousness of having done one or two good actions. A so-called, good conscience, unquote, is a physiological condition which may be the outcome of good digestion. They may depend upon the happy issue of certain undertakings. An ingenious mistake. The happy issue of an undertaking certainly does not give a hypochondriac or a Pascal any general sensation of pleasure. They may depend upon faith, love, and hope, the Christian virtues. As a matter of fact, all these pretended explanations are but the results of certain states, and, as it were, translations of feelings of pleasure and pain into a false dialect. a man is in a condition of hopefulness because the dominant physiological sensation of his being is again one of strength and wealth. He trusts in God because the feeling of abundance and power gives him a peaceful state of mind. Morality and religion are completely and utterly parts of the psychology of error. In every particular case, cause and effect are confounded, as truth is confounded with the effect of that which is believed to be true, or a certain state of consciousness is confounded with the chain of causes which brought it about. 7. The error of free will. At present, we no longer have any mercy upon the concept free will. We know only too well what it is, the most egregious theological trick that has ever existed for the purpose of making mankind, quote, responsible, unquote, in a theological manner, that is to say, to make mankind dependent upon theologians. I will now explain to you only the psychology of the whole process of inculcating the sense of responsibility. Wherever men try to trace responsibility home to anyone, it is the instinct of punishment and of the desire to judge which is active. Becoming is robbed of its innocence when any particular condition of things is traced to a will, to intentions, and to responsible actions. The doctrine of the will was invented principally for the purpose of punishment, that is to say, with the intention of tracing guilt. The whole of ancient psychology, or the psychology of the will, is the outcome of the fact that its originators, who were the priests at the head of ancient communities, wanted to create for themselves a right to administer punishments, or the right for God to do so. Men were thought of as, quote, free, unquote, in order that they might be judged and punished, in order that they might be held guilty. Consequently, every action had to be regarded as voluntary, and the origin of every action had to be imagined as lying in consciousness. In this way, the most fundamentally fraudulent character of psychology was established as the very principle of psychology itself. Now that we have entered upon the opposite movement, now that we immoralists are trying with all our power to eliminate the concepts of guilt and punishment from the world once more, and to cleanse psychology, history, nature, and all social institutions and customs of all signs of these two concepts, we recognize no more radical opponents than the theologians, who with their notion of, quote, a moral order of things, unquote, still continue to pollute the innocence of becoming with punishment and guilt. Christianity is the metaphysics of the hangman. 8. What then alone can our teaching be? That no one gives man his qualities, neither God, society, his parents, his ancestors, nor himself. This nonsensical idea, which is at last refuted here, was taught as, quote, intelligible freedom, unquote, by Kant, and perhaps even as early as Plato himself. No one is responsible for the fact that he exists at all, that he is constituted as he is, and that he happens to be in certain circumstances and in a particular environment. The fatality of his being cannot be divorced from the fatality of all that which has been and will be. This is not the result of an individual intention, of a will, of an aim. There is no attempt at attaining to any ideal man, or ideal happiness, or ideal morality with him. It is absurd to wish him to be careering towards any sort of purpose. We invented the concept purpose. In reality, purpose is altogether lacking. One is necessary. One is a piece of fate. One belongs to the whole. One is in the whole. There is nothing that could judge, measure, compare, and condemn our existence. For that would mean judging, measuring, comparing, and condemning the whole. But there is nothing outside the whole. The fact that no one shall any longer be made responsible, that the nature of existence may not be traced to a causa prima, that the world is an entity neither as a sensorium nor as a spirit, this alone is the great deliverance. This alone is the innocence of becoming restored. The concept God has been the greatest objection to existence hitherto. We deny God. We deny responsibility in God. Thus alone do we save the world.